We now change gears to go from looking at humans and equality to looking at non-humans and equality, specifically species equality, focusing primarily on animals, but of course it can include plants and perhaps other types of critters as well, if there are other such things. Now in general, although concern about ethics and other species, specifically animals, is often seen as a relatively recent phenomenon, it's actually been of concern for centuries. And as might be imagined, the main debate has centered on how we treat animals. Now, we use animals in many ways. Food, we still eat them, obviously. Labor, although in the United States, for the most part, we've switched away from animal-powered technology. Other countries still make use of them as a primary source of power. Basically, pulling plows, dragging carts, etc. And even in the United States, we still make use of them to a certain degree. We have police that use horses, and of course we employ dogs in various tasks, such as drug-sniffing dogs, police dogs, etc. We also, of course, keep animals as pets. And interestingly enough, or boringly enough, even though this is generally seen as a pretty good deal for the animals, there actually are people who consider keeping animals as pets as morally wrong. And of course, we also use animals for research. We test our medicines, our chemicals, and so forth on animals, often in ways that, well, would tend to upset someone with any degree of sensitivity to scenes of suffering. We also use them for commodities and products. Leather, for example, is made from some dead animals. We get their chemicals out of them. We use their bones and other parts. And so we use them as non-food commodities. And of course, they're also used for entertainment. For example, horse racing, dog fighting, etc. Now, there are all sorts of moral questions associated with species and animals. Namely, what is their moral status? Do they have any intrinsic value in the sense that, doing bad things to them, like using them for food or boots, etc., would be wrong? There's also the question of, do they merely have extrinsic value? That is to say, they're merely things that are valuable because we value them. Do animals have any rights? If so, what are they? If not, why not? Are there any moral limits on humanity's use of animals? If so, what are these limits? If not, why not? Now, interestingly, when it comes to animals, one way to look at it is by analogy in terms of reasoning about this. Because obviously, as I've noted in the uses of animals, for many of those things, if we were to use a human being in that regard, we would regard that as horrible. For example, suppose I went into class carrying a meaty sandwich, wearing fine leather shoes, a fine leather belt, and a fine leather jacket, and someone says, wow, those are some pretty nice shoes you got there, and a pretty nice belt, and that sandwich smells really good. And I say, well, the sandwiches were made for my neighbors. They finally annoyed me enough, so I had to do them in. But I didn't want to let all that meat go to waste, so, barbecued them, slow cooked them, that special secret sauce. And of course, you don't want the leather to go to waste, hence the fine new shoes and the fine new belt. And of course, that would be horrifying. To wear the skin of humans and to eat their flesh are considered terrible moral violations, not to mention illegal. Now, if I said, I'm just kidding, the shoes are made out of dead cow, and the meat in the sandwich is, pork from a dead pig, most people would be, oh, that's okay. But a good question is, why is that okay? Why is it wrong to, say, eat a human being or make, say, a purse or boots out of them, but it's okay to do so to an animal, assuming it's okay? Now, we'll be looking at in this section various views about other species, specifically animals. We'll begin by looking at the religious views of St. Thomas Aquinas, namely that God essentially authorizes us to kill and use plants and animals. We'll look at the scientific, at least scientific in the 1600s, view of Descartes, namely, since animals lack minds, killing or eating them is not a crime. We'll look at the psychological view of Immanuel Kant, that animals are not rational beings and are hence mere means, not ends. But as we'll see, interestingly and boringly enough, even though Kant considers animals to be mere things, he believes we should treat them well, as we'll see. And lastly, we'll look at the utilitarian view, that animals, on one version of this view, can count morally, and their treatment be a matter of ethical concern. We'll also look at an alternative utilitarian view in which animals are not of particular concern, or alternatively, they may be of concern, but the benefits of mistreating them can be seen as outweighing the harms. And that brings us to the end of the introduction to species equality. We'll turn next to looking at our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas and the question of whether it is unlawful to kill any living thing.